Okay, what do you get when you have Grimdark and you take out all the senseless violence, or at least most of it? You have nihilism. And while nihilism is actually more of a moral or social or psychological philosophy or whatever you want to call it, a way of life, even, it also has a fictional version that very much embodies a lot of that philosophy. The philosophy being that things just don't matter. It's somewhere between complete hopelessness and just calculated indifference. And as a fictional genre, it deals a lot with the acceptance of, well, there are versions of it. One very common version deals a lot with the acceptance of horrible things and the lack of belief in any good things, or in the idea even that good things could exist. Stories based around nihilism often try to describe something in their world as a kind of theme, or as not actually as anything analytical, but as a study of something in the world around the characters. Cosmic horror is one of the chief genres, or one of the best known genres at least, to use nihilism, because cosmic horror deals with things that are so big that they are, by their very nature, impossible to deal with, and either drive people insane or just make them simply give up on things. There's no point in fighting huge cosmic gods, or elder terrors or whatever. But nihilism can also be used for many other things, some of them extremely banal. A lot of stories that deal with people who are either abused or live under horrible conditions can be very nihilistic. It can be a genre that is best called nihilism, perhaps, where it is simply assumed that whoever is suffering is going to suffer, and there's nothing that can really be done about that. The stories are usually not about solving the problem, or defeating whatever evil these people are experiencing. It is about enduring long enough to do something that, in and of itself, has no real consequence for the suffering. Um, that means that, a bit like splatterpunk and grimdark, nihilistic fiction usually isn't about doing anything about the nihilism, or about the source of nihilism. The nihilism is not, it's not a problem that has to be solved, and that makes it very hard to tell stories that are purely nihilistic, because the assumption is that you cannot do anything. If you tell a story that is purely nihilistic, it's nothing but failure and expected failure and giving up, which is why, just like grimdark and splatterpunk, nihilistic stories are usually stories about something else that are simply given a big dose of nihilism. Again, this is a style genre, not a plot genre, and very few plot genres really cater to nihilism. it comes as a second part of the story. The story may be about anything really. It could be a mystery, it could be an action plot, it could be an adventure, it could be anything. But whatever is going on, the main characters are mostly struggling with hopelessness and defeatism and a complete lack of belief in what they're doing. Nothing they do will seem to matter, but they will need to have some other reason for doing it nonetheless. Um, and unlike splatterpunk, where there is a kind of enthusiasm for the darkness of the style genre, nihilism is pretty much the absolute opposite of enthusiasm. The one way that nihilism can sometimes break from that pattern is when the nihilism, for lack of a better phrase, is positive. When it's positive nihilism, nihilism is the idea that nothing matters. Negative nihilism is nothing matters, so why even try? Why not just give up? There's no hope. Why should we even try to do anything? Positive nihilism is nothing matters, so do whatever you want. Positive nihilism is not so much the mental. Negative nihilism is probably more the mental the mental aspect of grimdark, whereas positive nihilism is probably more the mental aspect of splatterpunk actually. That nothing matters, life doesn't matter, people don't matter, ideas don't matter, the future doesn't matter, the past doesn't matter, nothing matters. So just go crazy. Um, if there's something that sparks any kind of motivation in characters in a positive nihilism kind of story, they're probably just going to go nuts about doing this. It's going to be very uninhibited and very reckless, and probably also cold and cynical. Whereas negative nihilism is going to be fairly torturous in stories that deal with in stories set in world genres that have a very nuanced depiction of death, where death is not just you're alive or dead, but there is kind of a gray area. Negative nihilism can easily be the story of someone who is in this kind of torturous uh, condition of life and is forced to do things perhaps not even just against their will, but without their will even being a matter, even meaning anything. This could be a zombie that is magically driven to serve its master, or some kind of technologically hacked brain uh, causing a person to have to follow some kind of orders. And the motivation is not really a question because they don't have a choice in the matter. They're just along for the ride in that part, but they have enough freedom, both of thought and of action, to have to endure and have to in some way react to the horror that they're exposed to. Um, the partially undead who is still aware enough to actually experience the undying experience is probably a good example of a negative nihilistic story. It's not the plot, but it could give way to any plot, and the experience of being the living dead and suffering through that would very much carry a negatively nihilistic style through it. Whereas a dying world where everything is coming to an end anyway, or just a world that nobody who matters to the story cares about even the slightest bit, that is a fair stage for positive nihilism, where it's just do whatever you want, don't care about anything. Splatterpunk would be if that results in grotesque murder and mayhem. But it can be anything. It can be theft. It can be self destruction. It can be abuse. It can be drug use. It can be any kind of behavior that anyone who really cared about themselves or the world would never really fall into that gravely. And as anyone who hears this, if anyone does, might already have figured out, that doesn't really need to be any kind of fantastical element. It pretty much describes hardened drug use very well. In that nothing really matters other than the next big score. Um, but it doesn't have to be drug use. It can be hardened criminals, or it can even be hardened um, law enforcement, for example. Some detective or other kind of law enforcement that has so little else to live for that they just throw themselves selflessly or even self-destructively into their work. And although it's not a nihilistic story in itself, the movie Heat actually does have elements of this in it, in the very good portrayal of what is a bit of a cliche or trope, at least, of the police officer who is so devoted to their job that their entire life falls apart and they have nothing but the job, and they just go nuts about it and start to actively destroy their own lives in the pursuit of success at their job. Nihilism is in and of itself and on some level destructive. The question becomes what kind of destructive it is. Is it corrosive to everyone around the character? Is it the character who is just self-destructive? Is it the world that is self-destructive and the character is just unable to do anything but accept it? Whatever it is, the main characters, in one way or another, accept or are forced to accept being surrounded by hopelessness and meaninglessness, and any story that there is to be told is told more or less in spite of that. It's going to be that one rare thing that actually drives them, unless it is such a purely nihilistic story that there is no plot, nothing other than a deep description of the meaningless suffering that main characters are going through. Nihilistic stories are usually I'm leaning again I'm leaning towards saying artistic, but that's only if they're done well. Um, they can also just be very dark cry stories, or even some would say cries for help by the author. But if they are done right, they can be darkly artistic in a way that grimdark and splatterpunk stories rarely are, because the nihilist stories are about the experience more than it is about the world, as grimdark usually is, or about the actions of the main characters, as splatterpunk usually is. Nihilist fiction is dark, disturbing, often saddening, but they can provide a very interesting insight into ideas about the human experience or society or even other things that would not fit into a story that is about actually achieving something. It fits into a story that is about experiencing bad things and either enduring or surviving them, or simply following main characters as they spiral down into the darkness.